The sun barely cracked the horizon, painting the Gulf of Mexico in streaks of pink and gold. At 72, Jack Harper moved with the steady rhythm of a man who'd spent decades taming the sea. His weathered hands gripped the worn ropes of his fishing boat, Emma's Grace, a 1985 Boston whaler that had seen better days but still purred like a loyal hound. The dock behind his modest bungalow in Pensacola, Florida, creaked under his boots, a splintered, salt-bleached relic that used to gleam red back when he and Emma first bought the place. Now, it was just Jack, the gulls, and the endless pool of the tide. Jack lived alone, had for 6 years since Emma's passing. No smartphone, no laptop, no cable TV blaring news. His world was the water, the fish, and the quiet. Neighbors in the tight-knit coastal community knew him as the grizzled old fisherman who'd nod politely but never lingered for small talk. He'd chosen this solitude, or maybe it had chosen him. Every morning, he'd brew a pot of black coffee, check his gear, rods, reels, bait, and head out to his spot, a patch of turquoise water a mile offshore where the current swirled just right. It was where he felt Emma's presence most, where the world's noise faded and where the grouper always bit. That morning, Jack was after a big one. He'd spotted a flash of silver in the depths, a red grouper, maybe 20 pounds, the kind that'd make any angler's heart race. He leaned over the gunwale, adjusting his line, when a shadow loomed over the horizon. The low rumble of engines cut through the gull's cries. Jack squinted, shielding his eyes. A Coast Guard cutter, sleek and gray, sliced through the waves, closing in fast, too fast. The wake rocked Emma's Grace hard, nearly knocking his thermos overboard. Before he could curse the interruption, a voice boomed through a loudspeaker, sharp and commanding. Hands in the air now. Jack froze, the fishing rod still in his grip. He looked up to see rifles trained on him from the cutter's deck, their barrels glinting in the dawn light. 3 Coast Guard officers, clad in tactical vests, leaped aboard his boat, boots thudding against the fiberglass deck. They fanned out, kicking over his tackle box, scattering hooks and sinkers. One of them, a wiry guy with a buzz cut and eyes like a hog, barked, "Keep those hands up, old man." Jack slowly raised his hands, calloused from years of hauling nets and lines. His face stayed calm, but his gray eyes locked onto the lead officer, a broad-shouldered man with a name tag reading L.T. Carter Evans. Jack's voice was steady, low. "Mind telling me what's going on, Lieutenant?" Evans didn't answer right away. He motioned to his team. "Search every inch of this boat." The officers tore into Jack's belongings with practiced efficiency. They flipped open storage compartments, yanked out life vests, and rummaged through a small cooler where Jack kept his lunch, a ham sandwich, and a bottle of water. The youngest officer, a kid who couldn't have been older than 25, tossed Jack's fishing logbook onto the deck, pages fluttering in the breeze. A faded photo of Emma, tucked into the dashboard, slipped free and landed in a puddle of salt water. Jack's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He watched as they upended his world, all for some mistake he couldn't yet fathom. The grouper was long gone now, spooked by the chaos. All he could think was how Emma would have laughed at this, her soft chuckle, the way she'd tease him for getting into trouble without even trying. Evans stepped closer, his boots crunching over a stray lure. Jack Harper, right? He held up Jack's wallet, fished from a compartment near the helm. The boat's registration and fishing license were clipped inside, both up to date. "What exactly are you doing out here?" "Fishing," Jack said simply, his voice carrying the weight of a man who'd answered harder questions in darker times. The young officer, name tag, Petty Officer Riley, snorted. "Fishing." "Sure. This boat's got plenty of places to stash something illegal. Drugs, maybe? Or worse." He kicked at a seat cushion, revealing nothing but faded foam. Evans leaned in, his face inches from Jack's. "We got a tip. Anonymous. Said a boat matching this description would be at these exact coordinates, carrying unregistered firearms. Care to explain that, Mr. Harper?" Jack's eyes didn't waver. "I'm just fishing, Lieutenant, same as I do every day." "Keep looking," Evans snapped to his team. They doubled down. prying open panels, checking under the console, even tapping the hull for hollow spots. Riley knocked over Jack's thermos, the coffee spilling across the deck. Jack didn't flinch, but his gaze flicked to the photo of Emma, now soaked and curling at the edges. He wanted to pick it up, but he kept his hands raised, steady as stone. What Evans didn't know, what none of them could have known, was who Jack Harper really was. Decades ago, in the jungles of Vietnam, he'd been Captain John Harper, a Green Beret who'd led missions so classified they were barely whispered about in Pentagon halls. He'd faced down enemy interrogators, stared into the barrels of AK-47S, and walked away from firefights that left scars deeper than the ones on his hands. This search? This was nothing. A misunderstanding, a blip. Jack had learned long ago to let chaos wash over him like a wave. Knowing the truth always surfaced in time. Riley called out from the stern. "All clear, sir. Nothing but fishing gear and some old junk." Evans frowned, his suspicion deepening. In his experience, innocent men didn't stay this calm. They argued, pleaded, demanded answers. Jack just stood there, his weathered face unreadable, like he was waiting for the tide to turn. "Run his ID again," Evans ordered, grabbing the radio. "Command, this is Operation Gulfstream. Need a full background check on Jack Harper, age 72. Confirm any priors, military records, anything." The radio crackled as the officers finished their search, leaving Jack's boat a mess. Hooks scattered, cushions askew, Emma's photo still lying in the damp. Jack's eyes drifted to the sea where the water shimmered like it always did, promising peace just out of reach. He thought of Emma, her smile, the way she'd hum old Motown tunes while they fished together. He thought of the jungles, the screams, the weight of a life he'd left behind. And he waited. The radio sparked to life, the base commander's voice cutting through like a blade. "Lieutenant Evans, stand down immediately. You've boarded Captain John Harper, United States Army, retired, Silver Star recipient, for actions in Vietnam 1968. Saved his entire unit under heavy fire in the A Shau Valley. You're on the wrong boat. Target vessel intercepted 2 miles south. Suspects in custody, weapons seized." Evans's face drained of color. He looked at Jack, then at the radio, then back at Jack. The other officers froze, their hands hovering over the gear they'd tossed around, a simple GPS error. They'd stormed the boat of a war hero, a man who'd faced hell and come out the other side, all because of a bad coordinate. "Mr. Harper," Evans started, his voice softer now, almost a whisper. We didn't know. I'm sorry." Jack lowered his hands, his gaze steady. "Can I have my wallet back?" Evans handed it over, his hands unsteady. "Captain Harper," he corrected himself, the weight of his mistake sinking in. "My apologies. We'll clean this up." The officers scrambled to put things back, but the damage was done. The thermos was cracked, the logbook soaked, Emma's photo ruined. Jack said nothing as they climbed back onto their cutter, their heads low. The engines roared, and they were gone, leaving Emma's grace rocking gently in their wake. Jack knelt, picking up the photo of Emma. He brushed off the water, though the ink had already blurred. For a moment, he just stood there, the sea stretching out before him, endless and indifferent. Then he set the photo back on the dashboard, right where it belonged. The sun was climbing now, the group were long gone. Jack started the engine, the familiar hum filling the silence. He steered Emma's grace toward home. The fish would have to wait for another day. The sun dipped low over the gulf, casting a fiery glow across the water as Jack Harper guided Emma's grace back to the dock. The air was thick with the scent of salt and diesel, but Jack's mind was elsewhere, caught in the echoes of the morning's chaos. The Coast Guard's rifles, the scattered tackle, the soaked photo of Emma. They lingered like ghosts. He tied the boat to the weathered dock, his hands moving with the precision of muscle memory, but his chest felt heavy as if the sea itself had settled there. He wasn't angry. Anger was a young man's burden, and Jack, at 72, had learned to let it sink to the ocean floor. But the weight of being misunderstood, of having his quiet life torn apart, pressed against him in a way he hadn't felt since Vietnam. As he stepped onto the dock, the boards groaned under his boots. The photo of Emma, now creased and blurred, was tucked carefully into his jacket pocket. He'd salvaged what he could, but the damage was done. It wasn't just the photo. It was the violation of his sanctuary, the one place where he could still hear her laugh, feel her hand on his shoulder. Jack paused, staring out at the horizon where the last sliver of sun bled into the sea. For a moment, he was back in the Ashau Valley, 1968, the jungle closing in, the screams of his men drowned out by gunfire. He'd carried them out one by one through mud and blood, earning the silver star they'd pinned on him years later. But no medal could erase the faces he couldn't save. He shook his head, forcing the memory down, and walked toward his bungalow. Inside the house was a shrine to simplicity, a worn couch, a wooden table, a single photo of Emma on the mantel. Her smile bright, her eyes full of the mischief that had stolen his heart 40 years ago. Jack set the damaged photo beside it, smoothing its edges with a trembling finger. He poured a glass of bourbon, the bottle a gift from a neighbor he barely spoke to, and sat in the dim glow of a single lamp. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant crash of waves. He sipped the drink, the burn grounding him, and let his mind drift to the Coast Guard's mistake, a wrong coordinate, a tip about smuggled guns. They'd stormed his boat, treated him like a criminal, all because of a glitch in their system. And yet, when the truth came out, when they learned who he was, they looked at him like he was a ghost. Jack didn't care for their apologies. Words didn't fix a broken thermos or a ruined photo. But something about Lieutenant Carter Evans' face, the way it had crumpled when the radio revealed Jack's past, stuck with him. Shame. Regret. Jack knew those feelings well. He'd carried them through jungles, through hospital wards, through the long nights after Emma's cancer won. He'd learned to let them go, but it wasn't easy. Never was. The next morning, Jack was back at the dock before dawn, checking his gear with the same quiet ritual. The sky was bruised purple, the air cool and sharp. He was knotting a new line when he heard the crunch of gravel behind him. He turned to see Evans, out of uniform, standing awkwardly at the edge of the dock. The lieutenant's face was pale, his hands stuffed in the pockets of a faded jacket. No tactical vest, no radio, just a man carrying something heavier than himself. "Captain Harper," Evans said, his voice low, almost lost in the morning breeze. "Can I have a word?" Jack didn't stop working. He tied the knot, tested it, and set the rod aside. "Say what you need to say." Evans hesitated, stepping onto the dock. The boards creaked under his weight, and he stopped a few feet away as if unsure he had the right to come closer. "Yesterday was a mistake, a bad one. I disrespected you, your boat, your life. I can't undo that, but I need you to know it's eating me up." Jack looked at him then, his gray eyes piercing through the dawn's haze. Evans was younger than he'd realized, maybe mid-30? Yes, with lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. "Mistakes happen," Jack said, his voice steady but not warm. "What matters is what you do with them." Evans swallowed, his hands clenching in his pockets. "My dad was in the Navy, served in Desert Storm. He used to tell me stories about men like you. Heroes who didn't talk about it, who just did what needed doing. He'd be ashamed of how I acted yesterday. Hell, I'm ashamed." Jack's hands paused over the tackle box. He thought of his own father, a quiet farmer who taught him to fix what's broken, to own what's yours. He thought of Emma, who'd made him promise to keep living after she was gone. And he thought of the men he'd lost in Vietnam, their names etched into his soul like carvings on a tree. "Shame's a heavy thing," Jack said finally. "You carry it long enough, it'll break you." Evans nodded, his eyes dropping to the dock. "I looked you up last night. A Ashau Valley 68. You carried your sergeant 2 miles through enemy fire, took shrapnel in your leg, and went back for the others. They said you saved 8 men that day. 8 lives. I can't imagine what that cost you." Jack's throat tightened. He hadn't spoken of Ashau in decades. Not since the VA shrink tried to pry it out of him in 75. The memories were there, always, like shrapnel lodged too deep to remove. The jungle's heat, the blood on his hands, the weight of his sergeant's body slung over his shoulder. He'd been 25, fearless in the way only the young and untested can be. By the time he'd stumbled into base camp, his legs screaming, his men safe, he wasn't fearless anymore. He was just alive. I didn't do it for medals, Jack said, his voice rough. I did it because they were my brothers. Evan's eyes glistened, and he looked away out at the water. I've got a brother. He's in the Marines, deployed overseas. Every time I hear about a firefight, I wonder if he's okay. If he's got someone like you watching his back. I treated you like a nobody yesterday, and I don't know how to make that right. Jack set the tackle box down and stood, his full height casting a shadow over Evans. The younger man looked small, vulnerable like a boy caught in a storm. Jack remembered that feeling, standing before his CO after a botched mission, the weight of failure crushing him. He'd been forgiven then, given a chance to make it right. Maybe that's what this moment was. You want to make it right? Jack asked. Help me get this boat ready. I'm going fishing. Evans blinked, caught off guard. Sir? You heard me. Grab that line. For the next hour, they worked in near silence. Evans followed Jack's instructions, coiling ropes, checking the engine, prepping the bait. His hands were clumsy at first, unaccustomed to the boat's rhythms, but he learned fast. Jack watched him, saw the effort, the need to atone. When they pushed Emma's Grace into the water, the sun was just breaking free of the horizon, bathing the Gulf in gold. They headed to Jack's spot. The engines hum a steady heartbeat. Evans sat across from him, gripping an old rod Jack had pulled from storage. This was Emma's, Jack said, handing it over. She was better at this than me. Always knew where the fish were hiding. Evans took the rod like it was a relic, his fingers tracing the worn grip. How long were you married? 34 years, Jack said, his eyes on the water. Lost her to cancer in 19. She was the one who kept me grounded. Still does, in a way. Evans nodded, his voice soft. I'm sorry. I saw her photo yesterday. Before it, I didn't know. Jack didn't respond. He cast his line, the bait sinking into the depths. Evans followed suit, his movements hesitant but earnest. They sat in silence, the only sounds the lap of waves and the distant cry of a gull. Then, out of nowhere, Evans spoke, his voice cracking. I almost lost my dad last year, heart attack. He's okay now, but it made me realize how much I don't say to him, how much I owe him. And then I come out here, treat you like you're nothing. I don't know how you can stand there and not hate me. Jack's line twitched, but he didn't pull. He let the fish play, let the moment breathe. Hate's a choice, he said finally. I made mine a long time ago. In the jungle, I saw what hate does. It eats you alive, leaves nothing but ashes. I carried enough of that home. When Emma got sick, I had to let it go. She taught me that. You hold on to what matters. Love, duty, the next cast. The rest is just weight. Evans's hands trembled on the rod and a tear slipped down his cheek. He wiped it away quickly, but Jack saw. He saw the boy behind the uniform, the one who'd grown up on his father's stories, who'd joined the Coast Guard to make him proud, only to stumble under the pressure of a single mistake. Jack knew that weight too, the fear of not measuring up, of failing those who matter most. Pull your line, Jack said, his voice gentle but firm. You've got a bite. Evans jerked, startled, and reeled in. The fish fought, a small snapper, its scales flashing in the sunlight. He pulled it aboard, grinning despite himself. It's a good one, he said, holding it up. Too small, Jack said. Let it go. Give it time to grow. Evans hesitated, then unhooked the fish and released it, watching it dart back into the depths. Like us, huh? He said, echoing a thought Jack hadn't voiced. Jack smiled, the first real smile he'd shown in days. Something like that. They fished until the sun climbed high, the boat rocking gently in the current. They didn't catch much, a few small fish, all released, but that wasn't the point. Evans talked about his father, his brother, the fear of letting them down. Jack listened, offering a nod or a word when needed, but mostly giving the younger man space to unburden. And in that space, something shifted. The weight in Jack's chest lightened, just a fraction, as if the sea had taken a piece of it. As they headed back to the dock, Evans turned to Jack, his voice steady now. "Thank you, Captain, for today, for not holding yesterday against me." Jack cut the engine, letting Emma's Grace drift to the dock. "Don't thank me," he said. "Just don't forget what you learned out here." Evans nodded, stepping onto the dock with a new kind of resolve. Jack watched him go, then turned back to the boat, his hands already moving to the ropes. The sea stretched out before him, endless and forgiving, carrying secrets only it could hold. Somewhere out there, Emma was watching, her smile as bright as the dawn. The Gulf of Mexico shimmered under a late afternoon sky, its surface a mirror of molten gold and bruised purple. Jack Harper leaned back in Emma's Grace, the boat's gentle sway, a rhythm he'd known for decades. The air was thick with salt, and the faint tang of fish and the old fishing rod in his hands felt like an extension of himself. Across from him, Lieutenant Carter Evans cast his line with a newfound ease, his shoulders looser than they'd been that morning. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore. It was the kind of quiet that comes when two people start to understand each other, even if just a little. Jack's gray eyes flicked to the horizon, where a bank of clouds loomed, dark and restless. A storm was coming, but he wasn't ready to head back. Not yet. They'd been out for hours, talking more than fishing. Evans had opened up about his father's Navy days, his brother's deployment, the pressure to live up to a legacy he wasn't sure he could carry. Jack had listened, offering a nod or a quiet word, his own stories tucked away like the faded photo of Emma in his pocket. He'd shared enough about her laugh, her strength, the way she'd taught him to let go of the anger that had followed him home. From "You don't carry the heavy stuff forever," he'd told Evans. "You choose what's worth keeping. The rest, you let the sea take." Evans had nodded, his eyes bright with something like awe. "How do you do it, Captain, after everything? War, loss, yesterday. How do you keep going, like it doesn't break you?" Jack's gaze drifted to the water, where the ripples from their lines spread like secrets. "It breaks you," he said softly. "You just learned to live with the pieces." The words hung in the air, heavy as the approaching storm. Evans didn't respond, but his hands tightened on Emma's old rod, as if holding on to something solid could anchor him against the weight of Jack's truth. For a moment, they were just two men on a boat, bound by the shared understanding that life's scars don't fade. They just become part of the map you navigate by. Then a sharp tug on Jack's line snapped the silence. He sat up, his hands moving with the instinct of 1,000 casts. "Got something," he said, his voice low but alive with a spark of excitement. Evans leaned forward, watching as Jack worked the reel, steady and deliberate. The fish fought hard, pulling the line taut, its shadow flashing beneath the surface. A red grouper, maybe the one that got away yesterday. Jack's lips twitched into a half smile. "This one's got fight." Evans grinned, caught up in the moment. "Need a hand, old man?" "Watch who you're calling old," Jack shot back. But there was a warmth in his tone, a flicker of the camaraderie he'd once shared with his squad in the jungle. He reeled, the fish breaking the surface in a spray of silver and red. It was a beauty. 20 pounds, maybe more. Jack hauled it aboard, its scales glinting like polished armor. He held it up, inspecting it with the pride of a man who'd earned his keep from the sea. "Damn," Evans said, whistling. "That's a keeper." Jack's smile faded slightly. He looked at the fish, its gills heaving, its eyes wild with the instinct to survive. He thought of the men he'd carried through the Ashau Valley, their breaths ragged, their eyes pleading. He thought of Emma, fighting until her last breath, her hand in his. "No," he said, unhooking the grouper with care. "This one's got more growing to do." He released it, watching it vanish into the depths. Free. Evans stared, puzzled but quiet. Jack didn't explain. Some lessons you don't spell out. They sink in or they don't. Instead, he handed Evans a fresh piece of bait. Your turn. Let's see if you learned anything. Evans laughed, a sound that cut through the growing hum of the wind. He cast his line, mimicking Jack's technique, and they settled back into the rhythm of the boat. But the air was changing, the clouds now swallowing the sun, casting long shadows across the water. Jack's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. The storm was closer than he'd thought, its edges jagged with the promise of lightning. He was about to suggest heading back when a new sound broke through. A low, mechanical growl, distant but unmistakable. You hear that? Evans asked, his voice sharp. He stood, shielding his eyes as he scanned the water. Jack followed his gaze, spotting a dark shape on the horizon moving fast. A boat, smaller than the Coast Guard cutter but sleeker, cutting through the waves with purpose. It wasn't heading for shore. It was heading straight for the... Jack's instincts kicked in, the same ones that had kept him alive in the jungle. That's no fishing boat, he said, his voice low. He reached for the binoculars tucked under the console, his movements calm but deliberate. The boat was unmarked, its hull black, no flags, no registration numbers. 2 men were visible on deck, their postures tense, one gripping what looked like a rifle. Evans' face hardened. That's trouble. I need to call this in. He reached for his radio, then cursed. No signal. We're too far out. Jack didn't respond. His mind was racing, piecing together the puzzle. The Coast Guard's tip yesterday, the wrong coordinates, the real smugglers caught south of his position. It didn't add up. Why was another boat out here now, armed and closing in? He thought of the anonymous tip, the precision of it. Someone had known exactly where he'd be, someone who didn't make mistakes like bad GPS coordinates. Get low, Jack said, his voice cutting through the wind. Evans dropped to the deck, his training kicking in. Jack eased the throttle